Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Workplace Wellness webinar. This is our fifth or sixth edition of this, and it's great to have you guys all on board today. I've just been waiting an extra minute or two just to let everyone enter, but I'm going to jump into today's session. I'm going to introduce myself, and kind of get us up and running so that we can stay on track. There's a lot of things to cover when we're talking about this topic. Hopefully I haven't bitten off more than I can chew, but I'll also be happy to expand on this if there's anything more that we want to know as we go. So today's topic is on gut health. We got asked to cover this numerous times, and specifically today's session, I'm focusing on how it impacts energy and focus, and maybe how it's going to shape your workday, and have a few sort of take-home messages that might relate to each of you. So hopefully you're going to learn something, and hopefully you're going to engage as much as possible, ask your questions, and get as much out of this as you can. What I'm going to do, just to kick us off, is ask you guys a little question, which should pop up into our chat in a second. You'll see that there are some polls. Exactly, Michelle, bite off more than you can chew. I'm going to touch on that in a bit as well. Right, there should be a poll that has come up to ask you what your biggest struggle during the workday is. So something brought you here, something appealed to you about gut health, and we want to know kind of what are some of those issues that we experience. It might be some mid-morning energy struggles, maybe a little bit of brain fog and not quite getting the focus in that you feel you should. Maybe it's some digestive discomfort, or maybe it's stress and anxiety that's sort of been impacting your health, and you think, for any of these, maybe I'm struggling with that, and maybe there's something there that we'll be able to help you with for trying to sort of improve, because there are things here that are related to gut health, actually all of them. So I'm going to swing back to all of this at the end when we wrap up, and the things that I cover will hopefully give you a few learnings for any of these. At the moment, it looks like it's the afternoon brain fog and focus that is leading the way, but we've also got people with some digestive discomforts. Mid-morning energy is a little bit less common, which is great. You're starting your day strong, and stress and anxiety not particularly impacting your health. So we've had about 100 of you respond, and you can keep responding as you kind of go through this, because we'll loop back to it sort of towards the end. So feel free to keep going. Now, for today's session, what we're going to cover are 4 different topics, right? The first is gut feeling. And in that, I'm going to look at what the gut is and why this is all important and why does it matter. The second section I'm going to go into is titled No Guts, No Glory. And it's all about your microbiome and mental performance. We're going to move on to then the food choices that harm or heal that in a gut reaction, and wrap it all up with how to stomach it, eating for energy, focus, and productivity. So I like a play on words. Mish raised that a little bit earlier. And I thought it was quite sort of poignant to bring these in, because these terms are very much a part of our language, and there's a reason for that. Over time, we've just innately learned that our gut is so intrinsically linked to the way we feel, the way we perform. There are a number of other sayings here that might sort of pop into your mind as I go through them, but so many of them around our stomach, our gut, a gut instinct, butterflies in my stomach, all these sorts of things, because we know that there's a feeling and there's something that goes on with our gut, with our stomach, and that impacts either the way we feel, how productive we can be, our emotions, whatever it is, there's this link. And I'm going to dive into that in some detail today, and what we can do specifically from a nutritional point of view that might impact this. All right. And before I get into sort of the perhaps sexier stuff, we always need to start with the basics. Right. And I'm going to focus on nutrition and some important elements, and I'm not going to dive into these aspects, but I want to highlight that these are the most important things that will impact gut health before the sort of nicer and more interesting things that we're going to focus on after this. So we need to have good sleep. Our hours and our quality needs to be there. We need to focus on our hydration, be well hydrated. Our social relationships are important in gut health as well, limiting the stresses that we're under, and just general balanced nutrition is important. These are all the big building blocks of having a healthy gut, right, for all sorts of different reasons. I'm not going to dive into them in great detail. They'll come up little bits and pieces as we go through. But it's important just to lay that foundation and say you need to be focusing on that stuff, perhaps before we look at these other elements. But there's going to be some take home here that's going to improve it. All right. So I'm starting with the gut feeling, what the gut is. I'm going to talk a little bit about gut-brain axis and why this all matters. All right. Now, the gut, when we talk about it, it's tip to tail. So your gut runs from your mouth to your anus. It's about 9 meters long. It's long. There's a lot going on there. Goes through a few organs from your esophagus to your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, and all of that plays a part in different roles of digestion and our immunity and some mental health aspects that I'll speak to. And it's made up of lots of different things. So there are different processes that are going on. And interestingly, there are lots of things that live here. So throughout those 9 meters, we've got about 100 trillion microbes, bacteria that are living in the gut. And this actually makes up about 2 or 3 kilograms of your total body weight. There's a lot of this bacteria that lives there. These are the microbes that I'll speak to, and microbes are bacteria that populate the gut and have a role to play in all the things I'm going to speak about today. As I mentioned microbes, I also just want to define a few things here because there's some terms that will come up sort of regularly, and just to sort of speak about the difference in them. And quite often we might use them a bit interchangeably, but microbes are the bacteria. Microbiota are the groups of bacteria. So there's hundreds and millions of different kinds of them, different strains, and all of these together make up your body's microbiota. Then you might have heard the term microbiome, which is all of these bacteria, the microbiota, plus the genetic products that they're producing. So all the things that they're making because they're very active throughout your gut. So when we're talking about microbiome, it's all of your bacteria and that genetic material that's involved there as well, making up about 2 kilograms of your body weight. All right. Now we talk about a healthy microbiome. Obviously, we want a healthy gut. And when we speak to experts in this field, sort of the one thing that comes out in terms of what an actual healthy gut, healthy microbiome, it's all about diversity. All right. And a little joke sneaks in there if anyone is a Anchorman fan. Diversity is not a wooden ship. It's about the variety in your gut, right? That's the variety of bacteria, the variety of microbes, the different things that are going on there. It's variety and not number, right? This is quite an important distinction to sort of make, where more isn't always better. And this is especially apparent with probiotic supplementation that we see, where we think, you know, high dose probiotics are really good for us. And we actually find that when we take too much of a certain thing, too much of a certain strain of bacteria, it can actually have some negative effects, right? So we don't always just want more and more and more and more of these. We want to make sure that a healthy gut has a good variety of different bacteria that live there, and they're given the best tools and fuels to be able to thrive, and they live in balance, right? So a bit of harmony in the microbiome is what we're after. Now, the things that impact diversity are our environment, and that's what we're exposed to right from birth through to our young years, to where we are now as adults. All the things that we're exposed to in our environment are going to build this microbiome, right? We're exposed to bacteria every day, the people we touch, and the things and items we touch, everything we come into contact with is passing bacteria to us that eventually lands in the gut. And this is what starts to populate the bacteria and the microbiome that is there. The foods that we eat then layer on top of that for 2 reasons. One, we might actually eat bacteria. So there's bacteria on or in food, which is natural. And then it also provides the fuel for this bacteria to grow. So our diet is going to directly impact that diversity. Now, building this microbiome is important for a number of different reasons. And here I want to dive into a little bit about how this starts to impact mental performance and our function and our cognitive roles, and what's actually kind of going on. All right. So the bacteria in your gut has many different roles to play. It does a few things. Obviously, one of them is involved in the digestion of food. It does produce some vitamins in the process of this as well. Vitamin K, for example, is produced by the bacteria in your gut. It also helps to regulate our immune function, keeps lots of things sort of healthy and going well. So it's very important that they live there. The detail of this webinar, we're going to dive into the role of where they're responsible for producing messages, or to put it into sort of an easy term, is making some phone calls. All right, your gut is kind of, termed your second brain. And the reason for this is your brain is responsible for sending messages and controlling things around the body, but it's got a two-way conversation that's going on with your gut all the time. 24/7, there are these phone calls that are going between your gut and your brain and your brain and your gut. It's bi-directional, meaning going both ways, and they're talking to each other all the time. All right, one's controlling the other and vice versa. The different sort of messages that they send to each other. Some of them are chemical, which are hormones and neurotransmitters, and some of them are mechanical. So it's either the nerve signals or things moving or distension in the gut that can be felt. These are the different messages that are getting sent up and down. Now, under the chemical side, there are a couple of neurotransmitters that I'm going to focus on because these are of specific interest in our topic today. And these are serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, which I'm going to highlight their role and some things that we can do to impact these. Right, they directly affect our mood, our focus, our energy, our mental performance. And this is where it gets a little bit exciting in terms of how we can influence this. Right. Now, with any phone call, obviously we can get some broken telephone as well. We will remember that game from when we were young, sending messages. The more loops it goes through, the more likely it is to break, particularly when there are things that are out of balance. Now, in your gut, when things are out of balance, we see issues across a couple of these different areas. Right. And now where these messages can go wrong and how this impacts your energy and focus, kind of grouped into 6 different things here that we'll just cover. The first is purely nutrients absorption. We know that our gut's important for absorbing nutrients. That's where they all get absorbed. When we look at things that might impact your energy levels, specifically your B vitamins, iron, and magnesium, we see that these can be insufficient or deficient when we have gut issues, right? And those are specifically involved in energy production, right? So impaired gut function, often we see low levels of these vitamins and minerals. A imbalanced gut can also lead to low-grade and systemic inflammation, which impacts nutrients absorption. It impacts proliferation of gut bacteria, and the gut lining is impacted. All of these things can be affected by inflammation. And we'll speak in a bit about things that impact that. Looking at a couple of hormones and neurotransmitters of interest when we're looking at these messaging systems, some of them are important here. And the first are 2 that are controlled in hunger and satiety. That's ghrelin and GLP-1, which you may or may not have heard about, but they impact both hunger and satiety. And then the 3 that I'm going to dig into next are serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. These are produced in your gut. They travel to your brain where they influence your cognitive function, your mood, your focus, your drive, and all sorts of things are impacted by those 3 hormones. Now, certain foods can both harm and heal these 3 hormones. And if we're looking at what might impact the messages that are sent there, and what might break those lines, and on the upside, the things that we can do to repair them, we'll have a look at each of those. So serotonin the hormone that's responsible for mood stability, for your focus, and for helping to regulate sleep, can be impacted both positively and negatively by the things that we do to the gut. Now, the first is what can we do to improve serotonin production? Well, we can eat foods that are rich in tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is an amino acid that's the precursor. It's the thing that we use to make serotonin, and we can get that from the food that we eat and help the bacteria in the gut make more of it. About 90% of our serotonin is made in the gut, so having that impacted is quite important. There's some foods there that are rich in serotonin, rich in tryptophan, sorry. Turkey, chicken and eggs, salmon, tofu, nuts and seeds, those sorts of things are good sources of tryptophan. To improve serotonin, we can also eat more fermented foods. The fermented foods are providing the bacteria that's going to produce serotonin. So if the bacteria levels in the gut are too low, we can't actually produce the hormone. So we need more of it. We also need the substrate to make it, but we need the little powerhouses to do it, and they need to be in balance with everything else. Right? The things that might cause imbalance in terms of these specific bacteria that help here are ultra-processed foods, so a diet that's high in those. If we have an environment that's got a lot of stress, we aren't sleeping well, or we're consuming too much alcohol, these can all lower the levels of bacteria that's helping to produce serotonin. These imbalances, we see serotonin deficiencies and the impacts on things like mood, focus, and sleep. Similarly, dopamine can be impacted in this way. Dopamine also produced in the gut, and dopamine is responsible for our motivation and our focus, learning, and these aspects of cognitive function have a role to play and controlled by dopamine. Now, dopamine can be produced in the gut from tyrosine, which is a different amino acid. So if we're eating foods that are rich in that, we can help this production. We can get more of them. A couple of foods there, also some protein-rich options, nuts and seeds, green leafy veg, even our dark chocolate are good sources of tyrosine. Again, some fermented foods, so we can get the bacteria that help with that. And then by consuming some protein at breakfast earlier in the day, we can also help tie in with our body's circadian rhythm and production of dopamine, and good option for something there. Imbalances and what might reduce dopamine production. Again, stress, we've seen that again. So there's a little bit of a trend here of how this can impact gut balance and these hormones being produced. Sleep, again, and a bit more specifically here with the bacteria that produces dopamine. Refined sugars and stimulants seem to cause an imbalance here. They don't like it. They're not going to grow well in that environment. So we might be a little bit low in that, and the gut then ends up producing less dopamine. The third hormone here of focus, we're talking about GABA, which is involved in stress regulation, mental clarity, calmness, and this also gets produced in the gut. Goes up to the brain, sensors in the brain that are able to translate and use it for these roles. Things that help to produce GABA are magnesium-rich foods, nuts and seeds, green leafy veg, very good sources of magnesium. Fermented foods, again, they're going to help provide the bacteria to produce GABA. And then some sort of mindfulness practices and breath work. We know that these can help improve how the body uses GABA, and can help the gut actually produce a little bit more, which is quite interesting. So making use of meditations and breath work can actually help your body produce more of this hormone, which obviously, and that's the reason why it helps in terms of those outputs. Things that specifically might lower our GABA production, stress, right at the front again, and again, stimulants. So if we've got too much caffeine or other stimulants, it can impact GABA production. Alcohol intake and a low fiber diet. All right, so it gives you a little bit of idea about things that might impact positively or hinder each of these. Right. Now, when we're translating that into eating well, how can we actually put this into action? How can we lick the spoon of energy, focus, and productivity. I've summarized it into a few key points here, right? So maybe a few actionable takeaways. And the first is, if we're looking to eat for sustained energy and focus, not just to try and be full, we're going to be better off, right? So we're trying to eat functionally and say, right, well, I'm eating these foods because it's going to provide me better balance. It's going to help nurture my gut. And what that might mean is, firstly, just your meal quality and balance. Protein, fiber, and healthy fats really should be the basis of all of our meals, not just for blood sugar control or other aspects of, getting in sufficient distribution of nutrients, but quite specifically around your gut responding very well to that combination in a meal. We want to avoid ultra-processed foods and refined carbs, excessive sugar in the diet. Those are going to give us spikes and troughs. It's going to be a lot more difficult for your gut to navigate and manage all of that. They're going to work a little bit harder. The bacteria that thrives on refined carbs and excessive sugar aren't the ones that are going to help produce the neurotransmitters and hormones that we want. So we're going to create a gut environment that isn't conducive. We want to limit the stimulants, the caffeine and the alcohol, for all the reasons on the last slide. You saw how frequently that came up. And Canario, I think they commented as well, the sort of impacts it can have. So you're seeing the caffeine, what's going on? Am I having too much of it? Well, some of it can be beneficial in terms of helping sort of focus and energy levels and concentration. And excess, it's going to make us take a few steps back. The second point here, that hopefully the trend that you picked up on the last slide, we want to prioritize the foods that are going to support this bacteria growing. So probiotics, prebiotics, and vegetables for brain-boosting gut environment. Now, probiotics are the actual bacteria, just to give you a little sort of definition between the two terms. Some of you might know, but some of us might get confused by them as well. Probiotics are foods that contain live bacteria. So probiotics means you're actually consuming the bacteria in it. Often you might see a yogurt that says with live cultures. That means there's some bacteria in there. And then fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, kombucha, those things contain bacteria, because that's involved in the fermentation process. You're consuming those live cultures and those probiotics. Those are good. We want those. Prebiotics are the fuel for these bacteria, right? So it's the food that they need to thrive and grow. And we get that from our vegetables. Some are really good. I've listed some examples there, but they feed those beneficial gut bacteria. Another way of sort of focusing on this, or sort of implementing it, and I've got this always be counting ABCs that I stole from a Netflix documentary, which is one of the few that I've watched that is actually half decent. And if this topic has interested you, it is one to go and have a look at. Actually, it's Secrets of Your Gut, and one of the persons they interviewed in that used this phrase quite nicely of always be counting. So ABC, and this isn't about counting calories, but they were talking about counting the variety of plants that you have through a week. And if you can aim at getting sort of 25 to 30 different types of plants throughout a week, the chances are you're going to be ticking all the boxes of the different types of nutrients, different types of fiber, different types of foods that this variety of bacteria is going to thrive on. So if we've got a nice diverse diet, we're going to be getting these things in, and we're also going to be achieving our daily fiber target, which we know is important for this bacteria. The third is considering gut supportive supplement when needed. Right now, excessive probiotic supplementation, so not from foods that we're eating, but when we're taking a pill or some form of supplement, it's not always a good thing. So more can be worse, and excessive probiotic supplementation can lead to brain fog, actually, and struggles with concentration and focus. We shouldn't really be blanket taking high doses of probiotics all the time. We should be targeting their use, and maybe when we're particularly stressed, when we're traveling, or if we are ill, perhaps post an antibiotic use, we'll need to reestablish the bacteria in our gut. And then these probiotics can be good. but it's not about taking these things all the time. Looking at the fourth element here, and fine-tuning this with some meal timing, I wanted to bring this into about not just when we or what we're eating, but also when we might be doing it. Now, our body's digestion and microbiome activity does tie in with our body's circadian rhythms a little bit. So if we have very erratic meal timing, it can disrupt function in the gut. So the gut likes a little bit of routine. Our day likes a little bit of routine, and it's quite good to try and push towards this on most days, to eat within similar times, not eating too late in the day, making sure that we've got a little bit of focus on that. There's some reasons for this as well. One of them being that fasting and an overnight fast, for example, that we might just do when we're asleep, can support our gut repair and microbial diversity. If we haven't had food for a while and we reintroduce it, the bacteria in the gut likes to sort of latch onto that and grow. But if we go over prolonged fasting, we can see thinning of the gut lining, and this actually reduces beneficial bacteria in the gut and how well we can absorb different foods and process them. Coming back to a few of the hormones I mentioned earlier as well, and how they might be impacted by meal timing. One of them is this GLP-1, the satiety hormone, which some of you might know about mainly from medication and the popularity that it's growing there for combating obesity and the success it has. But this is also a naturally occurring thing that is produced in the gut. We can enhance it by focusing a little bit on the foods that we eat and our meal timing. It does increase after we've eaten a meal, but if we're eating too frequently, it can blunt that, causing excessive cravings and hunger because we aren't as sensitive to this hormone anymore. So steady pacing of meals throughout the day, sort of 3 to 5 hours apart, can actually help optimize that. Ghrelin, the other hormone that's involved with hunger control, is the one that rises just before a meal. It's the one that tells us that we're hungry, and it helps us seek out food, really. But if we have very irregular eating patterns, the erratic spikes in ghrelin can also compound issues and lead to excessive hunger and some issues in sort of controlling how much we eat. So it's important here that we find some routine, evenly space our meals throughout the day, try not to just graze and eat consistently, because all of these messages get a little bit confused and overridden when they have to kind of work all the time. Right. To wrap it all up and bring these into an idea of perhaps tying it into the messages or the poll responses that you gave a little bit earlier, and finding ways that we can trust our gut. Depending on the feedback that you kind of gave, I'm just going to see what the end results on that poll were. Most of you were sort of looking at the afternoon brain fog, so that lack of focus as being an issue. For a few of you, the energy and sluggishness was an issue. You can have a look at that number one block there. But almost half of you, I think 0.2 here is the one I can focus on here to summarize what we might look at. When we look at improving our focus, improving the brain fog, getting a bit more clarity in what we're doing, these are some strategies that might help sharpen that. All right, so reminder, most of the serotonin that we produce happens in the gut, 90% of that. That's a lot. Also, your dopamine and GABA coming back into that. All three of them are going to have a role to play in your body's ability to sort of concentrate, find clarity, have optimal mental performance. And an imbalanced microbiome can disrupt that, right? And it means you guys need to be focusing on this. What can I do to improve the balance of my microbiome? And how can I limit inflammation and improve my diversity? All right, simple takeaways for that. So focus on those fermented foods. Try get those in, foods that provide natural forms of probiotics. Tie them in with their own fuel of prebiotics, plenty fruit and vegetables, ABC, always be counting. Are you getting enough diversity through these different things so that you can create a healthy microbiome? And then make sure you maybe just limiting your caffeine earlier in the day is a little bit better. You can tie it in or get it from a source like green tea that gives you some L-theanine for a smoother, more sustained absorption of caffeine, a little bit better response from it. And if you find yourself in this group as well, perhaps just avoiding those artificial sweeteners in excess, because they might alter your microbiome if you're taking a large amount of them. Right. So if you were in the last sort of either digestive discomfort or stress and anxiety playing a role there, you can have a little breeze over those comments that I've made, because I am mindful that we're coming to the end of our half an hour. I've tried to jam a lot of info into here, but hopefully you've got some good takeaways from each of them. A lot of the things that you might be focusing on and trying to improve come from very similar themes. Managing your environment, your stress, making sure that everything's good, sleeping well, doing what we can from a nutritional point of view by consuming sufficient live bacteria, fermented foods, making sure that they are present in our diet so that we can populate the gut, tying it in with a good plant-based focus after that so that they've got the fuels. I think from this, the takeaway as well is understanding that how you feel, your mental performance, your productivity, so much of it actually comes from your gut. And if you give it a little bit of attention, hopefully you're going to see some improvements in any of these areas: energy production, brain fog, digestive discomfort, or maybe that stress and anxiety. All right. Those of you guys who need to drop off and jump into whatever else, please feel free to. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to spend the next little while going through the questions that you guys all provided here, so that we can cover it. And I'm also going to ask you if there are any topics that you'd like us to cover. We've got a few amazing speakers lined up. Much of the topics is also driven from you guys and what you want to hear. So be it on the mental health, the exercise point of view, the nutritional side, anything that you might want covered, questions that we can answer for you, that's what we are here for. All right. I'm going to jump into this chat and see if there were any questions that popped in as we went. Right. Hanley, are raw veggies better than cooked? From a normal, just general health point of view, I wouldn't say that they're better. From a probiotic point of view, because there's still going to be some sort of bacteria or live bacteria on them, and certain vitamins and mineral levels are higher in raw compared to cooked. Sometimes raw is better. The downside of raw is that from a food safety point of view, it's not always great. So we need to make sure that we are sort of washing them and taking some care. And where I said some vitamin and mineral levels are actually higher in raw veggies, the converse is also true. So some veggies, those levels are increased and their bioavailability is higher in cooked. I wouldn't split hairs about choosing raw or cooked. If you're eating them, raw, cooked, frozen, canned, whatever, fresh, I think the most important thing is that we're getting them in. And if we're covering how they're prepared, we'll be ticking all the boxes. Some very kind words. Thank you, guys. Kirsten loves using a marcy in potato salad with roast potatoes. So delish. Because Mars came up there, it looks like a few times, which is great. Really good form of a fermented food, which is good to be including. We can use that as an alternative to yogurts if we want. It marinates foods really well. Very delicious. So a good thing to be including. Kefir and amasi, slightly different things, but both really good, and they're a good source of probiotic. Thanks for that, Theo. I'm going to keep scrolling back here. You need to limit your coffee intake, Cinemasile. That's a good takeaway from it. There's nothing wrong with maybe 2 cups a day is the number that I like to suggest as being moderate. Other than that, we try and limit it. Canaria, can I take probiotic food when pregnant? If you are eating them, yes, keep doing it. Obviously, the food safety concern for some fermented foods can be an issue, and the first prize is always going to be that food safety trumps everything else when you are pregnant. So I wouldn't try sort of a new supplier or anything new, or you go for sort of the safest version of a fermented food, which would be yogurt. Yogurt for live cultures would be your safest, because they'll be produced in a little bit better conditions than perhaps a kefir or a kombucha or something that might not have quite the same steps involved. All right, keep scrolling back here. If there are any questions I've missed, please just pop them in. Caffeine can reduce motivation, and excess, definitely it can. All right, scrolling down. It's great to have you guys. Does all yogurts have live cultures? Really good question, Melissa. No, it doesn't. So unfortunately, a lot of them pasteurize yogurt after they've fermented it. The only way you'll really know is they'll advertise it these days. There'll be a little badge on there that says with live cultures. Pick n Pay's own brand has that, for example. Woolworth's own brand has that, for example, when that's there, and that'll help guide you with it. Right. Zambile, I wouldn't recommend any IV drips to get that instant boost. They aren't really effective. I'd much rather be sorting out our sort of habits and behaviors and making sure that we're ticking all of our boxes to get it. All right. Cool. Where does the science stand on vegetarian diets? That's perhaps a really good topic altogether. Thank you, Faith. I think it's a very long-winded answer for me to give here. So that's a great idea for one of our next webinars. I think lots of questions around this as well, and perhaps a follow-up on gut health at some point is going to be very good for us. What's great is the topics that are coming in here as well. Thank you, guys. Supplements looks to be one of the main ones here. And you can keep voting. We've had over 50 responses, which is super. The recording for this is also going to be available. We're going to stick it up in app, which you'll be able to get a little bit later today. We'll also send an email out once it's ready. So happy for you guys to view it again. Hopefully you've found this useful. And it's been lovely to have you all here with me. Please do enjoy the rest of your lunch break. Try and focus perhaps on a few foods that are going to support your digestive health over this lunch. Get in some movement if you can. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. Thanks, guys. Have a lovely day.